Hi, it's me. You can call me BP and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a lore lesson for you on Rockmond Dunbar, his departure from 911, and the lawsuit that followed thereafter. Since this is a very heavy legal video, I want to make sure that I get all the wording correctly, so I do have a script placed behind the camera, so if you see my eyes be all shifty, that's why. I just want to make sure I get my wording correctly. A few disclaimers before I start this video. First and foremost, I am not a lawyer and I did not consult legal counsel while making this video. I have tried my best to understand everything that I have read. I will cite all of my sources in the description below, and I will do my best to not offer my personal bias, but for full transparency, I am not a religious person and I am pro-vaccine. And most importantly, please be nice to each other in the comments. Or not, you can fight if you want. I guess it's good for the engagement. But anyway, here we go. So Rockmond Dunbar played Michael on 911, and he appeared in various episodes over his 4.5 seasons on the show, starting in 1/1 pilot, with his final appearance on the show being season 5, episode 8, Defendants, which aired on November 15th, 2021. While his departure from the show was very well written in the episode, basically, if you don't remember, Michael was dating this man named David, and David is a doctor, and he decided that he wanted to go help out in Haiti, and Michael proposed to David, and then they skedaddled off to Haiti, and that was that. And while that was written very well, fans were wondering why the sudden change, the sudden departure. Well, turns out the COVID vaccine mandates were to blame. There were new COVID protocols on the show, which 20th Television required all Zone A actors to be vaccinated. We learned that Rockmond had filed for both a medical and a religious exemption, but both of those were denied. According to the official complaint paperwork filed against the network, the proof that was filed with the exemption accommodation request was a statement of his religious beliefs, a personal letter explaining his beliefs, a clergy letter from a member of the church, which the church is like, it goes by a couple different names. It's either like the Congregation for Universal Wisdom, the Church of Universal Wisdom, just Universal Wisdom. All of those kind of relate to this church. And then for the medical exemption, there was also a submitted letter from Rockmond's physician stating that, quote, his medical history is incompatible with all forms of the COVID-19 vaccine. But since both of those exemptions were denied, he had no choice but to leave the show. The showrunner, Tim Minear, had offered to make reasonable accommodations so that he could remain on the show, and he even supported Rockmond's autonomy to make decisions for himself and his own body. But Tim said something along the lines of, well, we do work for a company and there's only so much we can do within the rules imposed on us by this company. But Tim was on his side enough, so he facilitated as graceful as an exit as he could. Tim was even quoting saying, well, I didn't kill him. I didn't completely foreclose the possibility of him coming back at any time. So the church that he is allegedly a member of is this Church of Universal Wisdom. This church has been written about and has been used for religious exemptions for vaccines for years. I found this New York Times article from 2003. And this article shares a lot about the founder, the head honcho from the church, whose name is Dr. Schilling. And this church was founded in 1974 to defend straight chiropractors like himself who regard Western medicine as paganism or Satanism. And he says, quote, what other people see as Western medicine, we see as state-imposed pagan religion. And Dr. Schilling seems like a very interesting man. He is said to be polite and gentle with a pacifist and environmentalist beliefs. He holds a very sincere passion for his religion. The New York Times article also says that he doesn't own a gun and is religiously opposed to war, but he did join the National Rifle Association because it fights government restrictions. He founded the congregation with 3 other chiropractors, all of which has since passed on. And the most radical of them is Dr. Daniel J. Dalton, who, quote, preached that physicians were agents of Satan, pharmacy was witchcraft, and Western medicine evolved from the worship of the Greek god Hermes, and they adopted his symbol, the snake entwined winged wand thing. In the New York Times article, there's a quote from Dr. Terry Marks, who at the time was New York City's Board of Education's chief physicians, and she said that she had never heard of the Congregation for Universal Wisdom, but after looking into it and reading the tenets on the website, she said, quote, if someone were really and truly a part of this church and upheld its belief that it would pass the test for religious exemption, but only if someone really obeyed this. That means they wouldn't treat their kid for asthma and wouldn't take their kid in for an appendectomy. The church is based on belief in chiropractic spinal adjustments and universal intelligence and forbids vaccinations. On their website, they have a full list of their tenets of belief, and I've just pulled a couple that I want to share with you. Some of them grammatically are a little interesting. I'm doing my best to read them word for word, but sometimes I stumble because they're odd. They believe the laying on of hands to the vertebrae shall be the sole means of maintaining the life force through universal wisdom. The avenue through which universal wisdom is conveyed is through the brain and spinal cord by way of the universal forces. There shall be no other way in accordance with ancient laws of life and from the divine laying on of the hands by adjusting of the vertebrae that the truth of life, spiritual and physical issue forth. There's no formal church setting where they meet because they state that, quote, God sees, hears, feels, and knows all, therefore God is everywhere all the time. They also state that, quote, no court or civil legal body or any tribunal anywhere in the universe shall proclaim itself master in judgment over the physical, mental, or spiritual health of any living thing. The only true judge is God in harmony with universal forces, and no other living being possesses the intellect to judge such matters. They also state that, quote, it shall be noted that a member is conscientiously opposed to killing, maiming, or willfully injuring a fellow living being, whether by edict, act of war, or dint of circumstance. It is sacrilege for them to introduce into the body living organisms or any unnatural matter. There is a whole subsection dedicated to what is sacrilege to them, and most of it relates back to medication, as you can see here. To join the congregation, you must agree to all of their tenets of belief and pay $138. It's $100 to join, it's $38 to process all of the fees, and they will send you a notification of your enrollment as well as a statement regarding their stance on immunization. That was all kind of that we heard about Rockmond Dunbar's departure from the show, is that he was a member of this church and his request for accommodations, exemptions from the COVID vaccine mandates were denied. And that's all we heard until February of 2022, when the news about the lawsuit came out. In the case, he cited that he was denied his medical and religious exemptions and then faced racial discrimination. 20th TV said that they complied with its legal obligation and they denied making decisions based on race. Rockmond claims he was refused permission to remain unvaccinated, while other cast and crew members, of whom, quote, none sought religious exemptions and none were Black, were granted exemptions. Rockmond's legal action claimed that, quote, the administrators who worked the network never took Mr. Dunbar's request for accommodation seriously. They openly mocked his beliefs and proceeded to deny Mr. Dunbar his accommodations based on nothing more than rank hearsay and assumptions. The network allegedly refused Rockmond's doctor's recommendations, and they allegedly refused to engage with Rockmond in any sort of meaningful interactive communication regarding the religious beliefs. Dunbar is suing 20th Century and the Walt Disney Company for $1.3 million, which he says he's owed under the terms of his contract. 20th Television said, quote, to ensure safe working environments at our productions, we have implemented a mandatory vaccination confirmation process. While we will not comment on any one individual, each request for exemption is given a thorough review and we grant accommodation consistent with our legal obligations. There are no differences in our process or decision making based on an employee's race. Disney Employee Relations responded and let him know that the physician's letter was not sufficient to support the medical exemption, and added, am I understanding that Rockmond is now requesting an accommodation based on religious beliefs as well? The network then informed Rockmond on October 4th that his last day on 911 would be October 18th because they allegedly did not have enough time to process the request for accommodation. Rockmond's agent responded to that notice and claimed that the actions felt retaliatory. After his last day on set, his employment was not terminated since they wrote Michael off to Haiti. He could return at any time. He then released a statement in which he said, quote, "I applied for religious and medical accommodations pursuant to the law, and unfortunately I was denied by my employer. My sincerely held beliefs and private medical history are very intimate and personal aspects of my life that I do not publicly discuss and have no desire to start now. I have been an actor in this business for 30 years, but my greatest roles are as a husband and a father to our 4 small children. As a man that walks in faith, I look forward to what the future holds. I've enjoyed the last 5 seasons with this wonderful cast and crew and will cherish the time I have been blessed to spend with this series and wish everyone involved nothing but the best." A spokesman for 20th Television then said, quote, "We take the health and safety of all of our employees very seriously and have implemented a mandatory vaccination confirmation process for those working in Zone A on our productions. In order to ensure a safer workplace for all, Zone A personnel who do not confirm their vaccination status and who do not meet the criteria for exemption will not be eligible to work." Rockmond was then fully terminated from the show. The only reason provided by the network was the failure to comply with the vaccination policy, which then Rockmond claims wasn't fair because he submitted his exemptions, which the network allegedly wrongfully denied. There was a Deadline article that came out the day after Rockmond's final episode aired, and as that article was being written, they requested a comment from Rockmond and his agent, and they allegedly only gave him 30 minutes to come up with a statement. And in that article, it contained info regarding the exemption request that Rockmond had filed, which that information was allegedly leaked. And Rockmond then felt like the network leaked that information to Deadline, the publication, in retaliation to harm Rockmond and his future career. The network would claim that Rockmond's religious beliefs were insincere because Rockmond had tattoos and piercings, which are considered sacrilege under the Tenets of Belief. But Rockmond said that he had those done prior to becoming adherent to universal wisdom. Even if they had accepted the request for an exemption, the network claimed that there would be no reasonable accommodations available that would have allowed him to perform these essential functions of his role while adequately protecting the health and safety of Rockmond and his colleagues. The producers had told him that they wanted to keep him on the show and would be able to accommodate his needs. They were able to film the first 9 episodes, and the producers were able to implement procedures intended to protect the cast and crew. In addition, as a result of a prior infection of SARS-CoV-2, COVID, which he did not contract while working on the set of 911. Rockmond has natural immunity, which is, quote, more robust and durable than the immunity provided by the vaccine. Rockmond was under the belief that others associated with the show were granted vaccine-related accommodations like paid time off, exemption from the vaccine for non-religious reasons, while he himself was denied the accommodations and terminated. And he ties all of this kind of back in to say that those other people, none were seeking a religious exemption and none of them were Black. On the official paperwork, there's a big laundry list of actual charges, complaints, different avenues of the law that you could file under. Stick with me here. So it was a violation of Title IX under religious discrimination, disparate impact on basis of religion, which is basically a seemingly neutral policy or action that causes a disproportionate and unjustified negative harm to a group regardless of intent, a Title IX violation on race discrimination, and a Title IX violation under retaliation, a violation of civil rights, violation of California's Fair Employment Housing Act for religious discrimination, race discrimination, and retaliation, breach of written contract, breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Basically, every party in a contract implemented the agreement as intended, not using means to undercut the purpose of the transaction, intentional interference with prospective economic advantage, negligent interference with potential economic advantage. We didn't hear a lot of updates on the case until 2 years later in March of 2024, when we found out that the case was going to trial. The case was going to trial. The court granted a motion summary judgment, which boils down to, quote, request for the court to rule that the other party has no case because there are no facts at issue. The party making the motion is claiming that either the case should not go before a jury at all, or a jury could only rule in favor of the moving party. So basically, like, the two parties are like, you don't have a case, judge, dismiss it, blah, 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 right? The court granted the MSJ to all of Rockmond's claims except for the Title IX claim for failure to provide religious accommodation. Specifically, the issues that will proceed to trial are: 1, whether Dunbar had sincerely held religious beliefs within the meaning of Title IX; 2, whether the defendants, the network, and the people who produced the show failed to engage in the interactive process; and 3, whether any reasonable accommodations would have been actually available to Dunbar without undue hardship to the defendants, the network. So it basically became like a religious discrimination trial. The U.S. District Judge over the case, Miss Dolly G., found that 20th Television may have discriminated against Dunbar for declining to provide him a religious exemption to their vaccine as a follower of the Church of Universal Wisdom. The trial going forward, so this is the step like in between. So he filed the paperwork, and then this is the like before the trial. So basically, this judge, Miss Dolly G., looked at the case and was like, okay, these ones can go to trial and these ones are done. So the part that went to trial, that trial will assess if Rockmond actually had sincerely held religious beliefs within the meanings of civil rights law that conflicted with the vaccine mandate, and if reasonable accommodations could have been offered, allowing him to continue acting on the series without endangering or causing undue hardship to the studio. You following that? Sure. Dunbar claimed that his request for an exemption was denied after Disney determined that he was not a true believer in the Church of Universal Wisdom. An exemption request from a guy from General Hospital. He was fired from the series after refusing the vaccine. It was similarly rejected after Disney, which owns ABC. So, like Disney, right? Because at the time, 911 wasn't under ABC. They questioned the sincerity of his belief in a book called Revelations of Ramallah. It appears that Disney vetted exemption applications on a case-by-case basis, investigating whether the religious constituted true religious institutions or whether the applicants actually followed the beliefs. In response to an alleged violation of Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which bars discrimination on the basis of race, religion, and sex, among other things, 20th contested the sincerity of Rockmond Dunbar's beliefs. It stressed that he had repeatedly taken actions contradicting the tenets of the Church of Universal Wisdom by undergoing certain medical procedures less than a year before refusing the vaccine. Rockmond would come back to that claim and said that he communed with God, who allegedly made exceptions and, quote, permitted him to act differently. He was also told that, quote, the COVID-19 vaccine was made from evil and that it will compromise his spirit and that it was not made for him. The court expressed skepticism at the assertions, explaining that communing with God is not a blanket privilege that undermines our system of ordered liberty. The judge also noted that Dunbar's original request for an exemption only mentioned unspecified medical issues, not any sort of religious objection. In the trial, the jury will determine whether 20th, why is that word so hard for me to say? 20th could have provided Rockmond a workaround to getting the vaccine without endangering others. On that same issue, the court emphasized that the return to work agreement barred unvaccinated actors from being on set with minors under the age of 12 and with others whom the vaccine was not yet available. In September of 2021, when kind of all of this was going down, the 911 cast included 3 minors, one of which who played Dunbar's child on the series, which I believe would be Mark Anthony, who played Harry. I think the other 2 would be the actor who played Denny and the actress who played Mara. I think, don't quote me on that. The remainder of the claims for race discrimination, retaliation, breach of contract, among all of the others, were dismissed. The order said about the race discrimination claim that, quote, there is no credible dispute that the defendants offered a legitimate non-discriminatory reason for finding Dunbar in breach of the agreement and terminating him. His non-compliance with the mandatory vaccine policy is a legitimate non-discriminatory reason. Rockmond, who had over $1.3 million in his contract left to be paid out, will also not be able to pursue punitive damage in the absence of evidence that anyone acted with malice or recklessness in denying him a religious exemption. So the upcoming legal proceedings will determine whether Dunbar genuinely held religious beliefs as per the Church of Universal Wisdom within the meanings of civil rights law that went against receiving the vaccine mandate. The trial will also assess if there were reasonable adjustments that could have been made by the studio that would have allowed him to continue acting on the show without putting others at risk or in posing additional hardships. Dunbar claims that Disney denied his request for a religious exemption because they don't believe that he's a true believer in the Church of Universal Wisdom. If 20th Century is found guilty of religious discrimination, this verdict could impact how studios handle allowing exemptions to vaccine mandates in the future. And there's been no update since, so we don't really know when this case is going to trial and when there is going to be kind of a resolution for this. Now, with all of that legal mumbo jumbo out of the way, I want to give my opinion, not about the vaccine, not about religions, but about the writing and the television. I support Tim supporting his actors, basically being like, yeah, I mean, this isn't the end of the world. I'll write you off to Haiti. I'll let you live in Miami. If this thing gets figured out, you can come back whenever you want. I didn't kill you off, right? You know, he did kill off Bobby Nash. I really appreciate the way that the writers and the showrunners protected the character of Michael being able to come back at any time. I think that was definitely a very respectable way to do it instead of like killing him. If you remember in the storyline, Michael seasons prior had a brain tumor. Tim could have brought that back and made it like completely take him out, but he didn't. He did it in a very respectful way, which I do appreciate and I do think shows a very good light on the writers at the time. Since this is just a video about Rockmond Dunbar and Michael in 911, I'm not going to talk about my opinions on the differences between Michael's character and Bobby's character and their departures from the show, but I think the way that they wrote Michael off was very respectful, and I wonder how this is going to turn out. One thing I do find very interesting is, while I don't know why the actor who originally played Harry, Mark Anthony, I forgot his last name, I don't know why the original actor who played Harry got replaced by Elijah Cooper, but he did.
Editing BP here, I was able to do some research and figure it out. And what Tim Minear said is that he had this storyline for Harry about, you know, him living in Miami and coming back to LA. And he pitched the storyline to Mark Anthony Reese. That's his last name. I figured it out. And the actor loved the storyline, but he was just ready to move on from 911. So they brought in Elijah Cooper to continue the storyline and even do a funny little hee ha ha, because Athena says that she barely recognizes Harry because he's grown up so much since he's been in Miami with his dad.
They switched out Harry's actor. If they were able to do that with Harry's character, why couldn't they have done that with Michael's character? I think that is one thing that they definitely missed about the arc at the end of season 8 with Bobby Nash's departure from the show, is that they could have recasted Michael to come back for that.
Upon reflection, I fully recognize that they probably couldn't do it because there was an ongoing lawsuit. That's probably why they couldn't recast Michael. Duh, girl. Come on.
I don't know. If they're able to recast Harry, I think they should be able to recast Michael and potentially have him in some storylines. I think that might be fun, but I don't know. I definitely think from a legal standpoint that this is going to be very interesting to see how it turns out. I did read a lot of legal paperwork. My brain was very fried because I couldn't understand half the words that were said. I was reading some of like the legal paperwork because there were a lot of different things that were filed, and I was like reading through it and I was like, you're giving me like a nothing burger like wrapped in a word salad. I'm like, what are you actually trying to say here? I have no idea. I don't have legal counsel to talk to anymore. He died. That's a dead dad joke. You can laugh. I have not found anything on the internet on when this case is going to trial, so just keep your eyes peeled and we shall see. But let me know what you think down below. Please be as nice as you want to each other. You can fight, it's for engagement, but please be nice to each other and to other people. Anyway, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in my next one.